Welcome to another edition of Grace Under Pressure, where my guest today is Dr. Lloyd Sederer. I will tell you all about Dr. Lloyd in just a moment. Grace Under Pressure is that show which so often deals with what's dismissed as the soft stuff, the caring and the commitment we exert toward others. But when you do it from a leadership position, as you will definitely discover that Dr. Lloyd is, you do it with a singular purpose of bringing people together for common cause. Dr. Lloyd Sederer, welcome to Grace Under Pressure.
Thank you, John. It's a privilege to work with you, know you, and read your work as well.
Well, thank you. I want to tell folks all about you. I can say one word: legend, and I mean that. So Dr. Lloyd Sederer is a psychiatrist, public health physician, nonfiction writer. He's an adjunct at Columbia University, and you've served as chief medical officer and EVP at McLean Hospital, which plays a prominent role in Dr. Sederer's newest book, Caught in the Crosshairs of American Healthcare, which we will explore. You've published 14 books and many, many articles, been quoted all over New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Scientific American, on and on and on. And so it is an honor to have you, Dr. Sederer.
Well, same here.
Great. Anyway,
some people ask or wonder, the guy can't hold a job. He just keeps having.
Well, I'm not going to say that. No, you're a legend in my book. So what I like about this book, Caught in the Crosshairs of American Healthcare, is, yes, it focuses on the challenges of healthcare, but you have told it in a narrative, which is your story at McLean. And so you can read the book just from a human drama story. But more than that, it's got lessons about management and leadership that extend far beyond healthcare. And so that's an added advantage of. So if your field is not healthcare, you're still going to get something out of this book, Caught in the Crosshairs.
Yes,
So
I think the same pickle that we were in applies to a lot of complex organizations, universities, state government, national government, big corporations in this case, and healthcare, et cetera, et cetera.
Great. Well, I'm going to jump right in here with what I think is a Yiddish word, and I'm going to ask you to explain it to us, which is ungepatchka. Could you tell us what that means and how it applies to McLean? So,
when you walk into somebody's home, that would be described as ungepatcht. You notice when they open the closet to put your coat in that it's got the kitchen dishes in it. Then you go to the kitchen and it's got all the shoes in it. Then you look around and you notice there are two temperature controls, and one is set at 90 and one is set at 35. There are towels, but they are, of course, not in the bathroom, and there's no soap. So this is meant to describe something where it's all there, but it's not taken care for. It's not thought through in a way that optimizes what you're trying to deliver. And that was my experience at McLean, which was all there. It's just that it was upside down and dated, and it was ungepatcht.
Okay. I love that. And you had me laughing at that description because I have been places like that. But there's a sort of a human element to that, is that we humans are good at putting all the pieces together, but sometimes we cannot make them cohere. And that's what you saw at McLean, correct? So
it's the best I've heard described. Thank you, John.
That's great. And I think that applies to a lot of things. We certainly in sports teams, they have a collection of players, but they don't play as a team. And and I would think in a place like McLean, everything is a good intention, yes, but for some reasons it's not fulfilled. So what was your first sign of trouble, if you will, when you were the medical director and EVP?
Well, I was recruited to the hospital because the new president and the head of the board realized that the hospital was headed to its demise because it was McLean and it kept people too long, it charged too much money, and the whole place needed to be renovated, remodeled. And I was hired as the clinical head medical director. And I saw that, and I saw these huge problems, and my boss and I were trying to warn the powers that be there, principally the senior doctors, physicians, and psychologists, that what we're doing now is going to be our ruin. And we were told, oh, they're crazy. The place is prospering, 328 beds, almost always full, good financial revenue, wonderful reputation, supposedly. And they didn't get it. They didn't see the storm coming, the corporatization, what I call the corporatization, others call, of American medical care, which is that American medical care is owned and managed now by corporations. And the principal impact of that is that decision-making has been taken away from doctors and other healthcare professionals and put in the hands of MBAs, CEOs, and artificial intelligence.
That's kind of scary, and I have to laugh. My father, as I told you, was a family physician, and he was grew up in the era of mentored by, I would say, men, because they were all men in those days, who came of age before the age of antibiotics, and so that was all about bedside manner. And my father he was very much on the science of medicine and practiced it well, and he loved the art of medicine. But he used to say, at the end of his career, it was managed care, as you're talking about, and he would get in these phone call fights with the customer service and go, now tell me when you graduated from medical school. So I'm sure you've had that kind of conversation, Dr. Sederer. So
you have to fight back. That's part of what the book's message is, that it's hard, but you can win. But now it's even harder, because before your dad could call and argue with a person, now your dad would call, or any of us would call, and there would be automated response. There would be a sequence of questions. There is nobody to talk with.
Well, that's good. So if we could go from the Yiddish word ungepatka to the Greek word hubris, that's kind of one of the reasons we're in the mess we are with our healthcare system, is it not? So,
I see hubris as having a very positive side and a very negative side. The story that I tell is meant to show my ambivalence. It's a story of a patient that I served, international patient at the hospital.
yeah.
And the hubris was mine and the hospital's, which was taking somebody of that station, royalty, and from halfway around the world, with a limited capacity for English, and imagining that a psychiatric treatment could reach that person and get beyond that person's cultural beliefs, language, and so forth. I believe that if anybody could do it, we could do it, and I put myself in charge of the case to prove it. And that was hubris. And it was driven in part by, let's see how good we are, but also because if you're trying to change the medical culture in other countries, and you have an opportunity to show success with somebody that is very well recognized, then you begin to change things from the top down. It begins to drift down to general people that psychiatric care can be helpful.
Right. So you say playing on this sense of hubris. We in America like to think we have the best healthcare system in the world, and all that, but our outcomes are not in keeping with rates of other developed countries. For example, I know specifically maternal death rates are really high, and I scratch my head, how the heck can that happen? But there are other instances of that too. So what's going on, Dr. Sederer?
Yeah, it is, Lloyd, it is maternal and infant mortality. So our country has the highest rates of mothers dying at birth and infants dying at birth than even not just the highly developed Western countries, but many of the third world countries. It's hard to believe, but it is the case, and some of it is a reflection of the inequities in our health delivery. But when 6 or 8 countries are compared, and you ask the question, how long do people live there? And at the bottom of the list is the United States. You ask how many people suffer from chronic disease and multiple chronic diseases, hypertension, heart disease, diabetes, arthritis, and we're the highest there because and that's not a good thing because it reflects the fact that these are, if not preventable, they're conditions that can be mitigated in their development and mitigated in their expression. So chronic disease, we also have this state of overdose deaths and suicides that is beyond any other country by a magnitude of I don't know how many. And the irony of this is that the United States spends the most amount of money per person per capita than all of these countries. So what are we paying for?
Right. Well, it leads to another question. I don't know if it's directly related, but you talk about that sometimes treatment itself can be toxic and achieve exactly the opposite. Would you explain that, Dr. Lloyd?
Well, I like to tell a story from ancient Egypt that is about treatment being toxic, and then fast forward. So so if you look, not that I did, into papyrus, ancient Egyptian history, there were notations by physicians about how to heal people and how to heal wounds. And they were very simple. Clear the debris, wash with water, cover with a bandage to prevent infection, and leave it alone. And that was the prevailing protocol for medical care, particularly of wounds, until about the 13th or 14th century. And what was unique about that time was that gunpowder was invented and became the principal means of death. Guns became the principal means of death in war. And battlefield surgeons then encountered many soldiers with wounds, and they treated them by pouring boiling oil onto the wound. And of course, it didn't work. And not only that, it was really a horrible experience. So some of them, I'm sure, avoided the doctor at all costs. And you'd think, well, that was not a good idea. But it lasted 200 years until, as the story goes, a battlefield surgeon ran out of oil. And what did he do? Well, he washed the wound, he removed the debris, put on a bandage, and lo and behold, the whole nature, the whole culture of medicine changed at that point. But what it also says is that that's how hard, that's how fixed ideas can be about what you should do and how you should care for other people in this case.
Right. Well, that's, your field is psychiatry. And so the mental health challenges in our country are becoming overwhelming in some ways. What our Surgeon General said, that loneliness, 1 out of 5, is really a mental condition. I mean, an affliction. So what do we do about it?
Well, thanks for that simple question. It's not one thing, but what my book is about, that all this mess that we have been in for a while was very clear to a lot of people, to the population, but nobody stepped up to do anything about it. Federal government didn't. Well, maybe Obamacare was an effort, but that was, cut short as much as possible by politics. Corporations didn't step forward because I learned that's not their core business. They make cars, they make shoes, whatever. And if they try to get into that business, goodness knows what's going to happen to their core business. Advocacy groups are important for a voice, but they really have no teeth. So we had this mess that just kept getting worse, more and more expensive. And who stepped up? For-profit corporations, for-profit insurance companies, and private equity corporations. They had the money, and their solution to the mess was to make medicine a business. And that's what we're experiencing now.
So when medicine is a business, what's the downside of that? Because the positive side would be, perception would be, well, it's well managed. So tell me what's going on there. So.
Well, first of all, just rewinding, that takeover takes authority, medical decision-making away from professionals. And suddenly you have people who make decisions on the basis of balance sheets, on money, and profit becomes first, patients come second, and patients can just as well be ignored or bypassed or badly treated in order that profits be maintained, because that's what it means, for profit. And these type of for-profit organizations, not that all are, they had to ensure that they would give payment to their equity investors, to their shareholders. And so the whole aim of healthcare became making money. And we know what that feels like in terms of, as individuals and families. You can't get an appointment with a doctor. Not that it was good before, but now you can't get an appointment. It's months later at best. And then you go into the doctor's office and you're allotted 10 or 12 minutes. And the doctor, I don't know if your viewers have had this, we're doctors sitting in front of a big screen, typing into an electronic medical record. They're not looking at you. They're not doing anything that used to be called the doctor-patient relationship. They're just mechanically involved in, and without a sense of who the person is. And that's so essential. That's the nature of the doctor-patient relationship, and why healthcare can excel, because it's not just reliant on algorithms. It's reliant on what happens during the doctor-patient relationship, the trust that is built up, the capacity of the doctor to see things that wouldn't necessarily be seen. That's all vanished.
No, that is frightening in itself. And I know it's taken, because you are a physician, so it takes a toll on the medical, on those who provide it, the physicians and the staff, nurses, and all of that. They feel they're under the gun. And one of the problems they suffered, and you know this, and it's in the book, is burnout. So, which is not healthy for any system, for-profit or not-for-profit or altruistic. So, what can be done? What's a step that can be done to alleviate this?
Yeah.
So.
Or just to broaden a little bit, the doctors are fleeing medicine, nurses too. And the physician workforce in the United States is dropping like a stone, which means that it's hard to get an appointment with a doctor. There's more medical errors, and that you don't have the experience of being cared for, and but your costs continue to go up even as a subscriber. That is driving there are two principal reasons that doctors are fleeing healthcare. The one is burnout that you mentioned, and the second is what's called moral injury. Burnout is an emotional state. Some people think it's depression, but no, it's different. And what's principally different about it is that it's the consequence of working in an overwhelming, toxic, impersonal environment. And 1 in 3 doctors now are considered to be suffering from burnout because of the environment that has been created for physician practice in all kinds of settings. The second is
I want to drill down on this burnout because we hear it all the time, but I don't know that we analyze it well enough to. So if I'm suffering or a physician is suffering burnout, what's happening to us, Dr. Lloyd? So,
Well, we feel emotionally spent. We can't bring our full selves to our work. We start to get very cynical, that instead of bringing hope to a patient and family, we bring cynicism. And you realize that you're getting very negative for good reason, but you're still responsible for this patient, but you don't have the authority any longer. Those are the conditions that people experience, and they experience it physically with all kinds of distress, GI distress, whatever, headaches, and they sleeplessness, and they experience it emotionally, which is again being spent, not having the energy to bring to your work or to bring to your patients. And the complication, if I may here, John, is that this has been studied, doctors have been surveyed, and when asked why you're running away, why you're fleeing, they say burnout, but they say also moral injury, which affects
explain
you.
that, because that is a term that I have seen, and it's now becoming in our parlance. So tell us what moral injury is.
Yeah, it's a fancy way of saying that you are not living up to your own standards, not to anybody else, but your own standards. You know that what you're doing is not good enough. You know that what you're doing essentially also is being obedient to some people who don't know what they're doing. And all of that churns up this tremendous tension that you don't have the integrity, and that's moral injury because you are not living up to your own standards. And many doctors leave, but many stay. They're loyal to their patients, loyal to their clinical practice. They need a job. And those are the ones who, on top of the burnout, have this experience of being very hard to live with yourself.
Right. And then, so, I mean, that is another effect that it has to manifest itself in patient care, would it not?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, in all kinds of ways that you can imagine, which is that you realize that you're with a patient and you should be looking at the patient and you should be spending more time, and you're not. You realize also that the amount of time that you're putting into administrative tasks, particularly electronic medical record, is phenomenal, that for every hour of clinical care, there's an hour on the computer, and many doctors then can't do that during the day, and they spend a couple hours at night. The whole churning process and protocols, the schedules for the doctors are determined by balance sheets. How many people do I need to see today in order for my company, my owner, to make a profit?
Okay. Now, what we've what we sketched is pretty dismal, but your book is not dismal. It's an uplifting story, and it provides hope. I'll say, caught in the crosshairs. Yes, it gets your attention, but there's hope in this. So, what are some things that patients can do, Dr. Lloyd? So,
Thank you for that question, because I focus on that in particular. Patients and families have to become demanding patients and families. In the past, that was experienced as they were a nuisance, they were difficult patients, but you're due a certain amount of care, a certain amount of thoughtfulness, experience. You do that, and you won't get it unless you demand, unless you go in there with questions. Why did you come to this conclusion about what's the matter with me? How did you choose this treatment? What are the options? How much is it going to cost me? Whatnot. You have to do that. And the whole culture of being a patient needs to shift away from being meek and dismissive to being demanding. And that was one of the things I think that can happen and will begin to tilt the balance, because what it does is it just aggravates what already is impossible, and something has to give.
No, I like that. You have to become your own advocate. So what about the docs? What do the docs have to do? So
Yes, here some people think I'm a bit off the rails, but I think
well, sometimes that's the only way to get things done. All
uh,
right, what's your take?
there you go. That there are two things, two power instruments, if you have, that are available to doctors. The first is unionizing, which means you can strike. And going on strike is the best way almost to get at the heart of for-profit corporations, because you're cutting off their oxygen. You're cutting down the amount of money that they make. And sometimes they'll sweat it out for a while and you may lose some battles. But think of not just nurses who've been doing this for a while, but the Hollywood writers' strike. You can win at that, not as an individual, but as a group, and unions provide that. And just this week, the doctors, anesthesiologists at Cedars-Sinai in LA went on strike. So striking is a tool, a powerful tool. And some people say, well, how can you do that? It's unethical. But what you're doing it because you're trying to restore an ethical and quality environment. The second thing is contracts. An example of that was a few months ago, a very large doctor practice, maybe 200 doctors, that had a massive contract for Medicare with a Medicare Advantage company, which is basically Medicare managed care, privately run and held. And the contract was up for renewal. And the doctors, the heads of that organization, of the doctor organization, said, we're not going to, the practice, we're not going to recontract. Which of course was thought as goofy. Of course you're going to recontract, and they didn't. And overnight, 30,000 patients were without a doctor or a doctor's office to go to. That is disruptive. That's the kind of disruption that really gets attention, because now it's not just the doctors fleeing, it's the patients saying, what am I paying for? I can't see a doctor. That kind of disruption, a contract disruption, unionization, striking, I think will become increasingly a part of how doctors regain control over medical practice.
Well, that is certainly going to upset the apple cart in many ways. So I'll leave that. So as you know, we have we're racing toward the end of our show. It could go on for another hour or so, but I need to bring it to a close. And as you know, I ask every guest a story about grace. And I'll say, Dr. Lloyd, you've led a life of grace, but share a story about grace that you want to share with our listeners, please. So.
First, I want to say that grace is God-given. Grace is something you can enhance, you can work at it as you have described as a virtue, but it's God-given. And it's very different from kindness, because kindness you can learn, and grace is something that is there available to you because God, I think, is immanent, and you can see God and hear God by looking at everyday life, by looking at the birth of an infant, by looking at the trees that bloom in the spring, by looking at an ocean, by looking at people who love each other. That's God, and that's immanent. And the story, I took a look at the tape of when we last spoke, and I told a story about a little village in rural France. And I told a story about how kindness was my experience in a very unexpected way, but the grace preceded it. There were ransom camps in the Sudan, and young men would flee Ethiopia Eritrea because either they were going to be killed or they were going to be conscripted into the army, and the conscription was for life, and very perilous life. And so many of them tried to run away, and they ran, and they were captured by gangs. And these were ransom gangs. They were principally in the Sudan, later in Libya, and they would torture these young men, and they would call their families while they were torturing somebody and say, we want X number of dollars. These were poor people. So it was just as horrific an experience as possible. And the grace was that there was a documentarian who demonstrated this, who revealed what was going on, and who helped a group of these young people escape from where they were and were brought to the suburbs of Paris to regain their life or to try to make a life again. And in this village, where there was this very dominant, impressive, caregiving abbey, massive abbey from the 11th century, and the priests there were called brothers. And some of the brothers realized that this was going on. It was in the papers or whatever. And one of them went to the organization that was bringing these people and said, we would like to host them. We would like groups of them to come for a few weeks, and we'll host them. We have dormitories, we have food, but more so, we're going to give them an experience of how life can be, and an experience with hope, an experience with faith and with support. And that became a practice in this village, so that groups would come. Sometimes they would come twice in a year, but they come for weeks. And this is grace. This is God-given. How did that happen? God made it happen. That grace that they exhibited and that these young people experienced, to me, is phenomenal. And I think of it as grace.
Well, that is a powerful story. Definitely, it is that something which is given to us with no strings attached, and the Abbey and the others enable these young men to find a path and an alternate, and to better themselves, which I'm sure they passed along to others, which is the nature of grace itself. So, Dr. Lloyd Sederer, how can we find you and your great book, Caught in the Crosshairs?
My handle is Ask Dr. Lloyd, AskDrLLoyd. You put a dot and a com after that, and you go to my website, and there's my work there. But also, you can ask me questions. You can talk with me. You can comment through that website.
Great. Well, we will put that in the notes. Dr. Lloyd, it has been such an honor to connect with you again, and thank you for the great work you do, personal generosity that you have shown me, and it's an honor to have you on the show. And with that, we will close out.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for giving the opportunity to contribute. That's purpose.